I stared at the stack of papers on my desk. Another one. Another dead animal. This time it was a couple of elk, ripped apart like a kid's toy. This wasn't normal. Not even for the wilderness around Misty Pines. Just last week, it was 3 deer, mangled the same way. Whatever was doing this, it wasn't your average bear or mountain lion. Got another one this morning, Aide said from behind me. I turned to see him holding a file, his face grim. Oop at Cricket Creek. Trying to figure out the pattern here, I muttered, shuffling the reports. Any connection to the other cases? Same as the rest, he said, dropping the new file on my desk. I flipped it open. The photos made my stomach churn. I shoved the file aside. Suddenly not hungry anymore. This is getting out of hand, I said, glancing around the room. The maps, the posters about bear safety, it all felt so pointless now. When I first got here, I thought the worst I'd have to deal with was the occasional grumpy bear. It chuckled, settling into the chair across from me. The old wood creaked under his weight. You're thinking about the first time, right? The W word. I laughed, but it came out a little shaky. Yeah, your face was priceless when I told you about it. Ed grinned, his wrinkles deepening. Thought you were going to quit on me right then and there. Almost did, I admitted, leaning back. Remember, we were tracking what I thought was a mountain lion. I told you they don't leave footprints that change size and shape as they walk. Ed nodded, the fluorescent light flickering above us. Nicole called, he said, his voice turning serious. They're seeing similar things in her district. My stomach sank. If Nicole was involved, it was serious. How bad? Bad enough she's driving up today. Be here in an hour, maybe less. He glanced at the clock on the wall. 9:47 a.m. The elders called, too, he added. That made me feel sick. The local Native American community didn't call unless something was very wrong. When was the last time they called? I asked, even though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Ed hesitated. 15 years ago. We lost 3 good rangers that winter. The room went silent. I stared at the map on the wall, where I'd marked every attack with a red pin. It wasn't random. It was a spiral, and it was closing in on us. Matt, it said, using my first name, which was rare for him. The way you reacted to all this when you first got here, the doubt, the disbelief, that's how a normal person is supposed to feel. That's good. But what happens next, He trailed off. We need your skepticism to be on our side, not against us. Yeah, I said, my eyes glued to the map. The attacks were getting closer together, both in time and distance. What does that mean to you? It's hunting, I said, a chill running down my spine. But not for food. It's testing limits. Gaining knowledge, Aide finished, growing confident. The door flew open and Nicole stood there, breathless. She was early. Come look at this, she said, thrusting her phone at me. New tracks. Just came in 10 minutes ago. Half a mile west. I stood up. It wasn't about believing anymore. Something was out there, and it was heading towards Misty Pines. Let's go talk to the elders, Aide said, and we all nodded. As we walked towards the exit, Ed looked at me, a knowing glint in his eye. Like he'd expected this all along, like he'd been waiting for me to come around. I didn't like that thought one bit. We piled into Ed's Jeep and headed for the eastern trailhead. The sun was up, but the mist hadn't burned off yet. The crunch of gravel under the tires faded as we entered the woods. Nicole led the way, her footsteps silent and sure. My mind drifted back to the first time Ed had taken me tracking in these woods. It seemed like a fitting memory to revisit. You're real quiet back there, Ed said, his voice just loud enough to hear. Reflecting on the day you taught me the bevy word, I replied. Nicole glanced over her shoulder. Ed told me about that. We were walking single file now, the air thick and humid. The branches overhead were so dense, they barely let any sunlight through. It was here, Ade said, stopping beside a fallen log covered in glowing mushrooms. Right, Matt, I remembered. About 6 months ago. We were hunting something else then, but the blood had been black. You thought it was a mountain lion, I said, a weak smile tugging at my lips. And you thought I was crazy, Ed chuckled. It felt like I was that same newbie again, experiencing it all over again. Here, Ed said, pointing to a large pine tree. This is where we found the first tracks. I remembered those footprints. They looked like a wolf's at first, but then they started morphing, growing bigger, wider. You got real quiet. Ed continued, his voice taking on that storyteller tone he used when he was about to drop some serious knowledge. You just kept measuring them with your ruler. Nicole sat down on a fallen log, ready to listen. Because they couldn't be, I said. Tracks don't just change size. But these did, Ade said. The atmosphere had changed. A stick snapped in the distance, and we all froze. One I told you about the winter of '82. Ed went on. The hunting party that disappeared up at Crystal Lake. I leaned against a tree, the memory vivid. You said they found only pieces of them. And there were tracks all around the campsite, like something had been walking on 2 legs, but with footprints too long and twisted to be human. And then you said the word, Nicole said, looking at Ed expectantly. Wendigo, Ed said, and the woods seemed to echo the word back at us. I remembered laughing when Ed first told me about it. I thought you were just messing with the new guy, I admitted. Until we found the deer, Ade said, his expression darkening. That deer hadn't just been killed. It had been mutilated, twisted into something unnatural. The elders say seeing is believing, Nicole said softly, but also that believing is seeing. You have to have faith in what's out there. Once you do, you'll start seeing things that have been there all along, but you just didn't notice because you didn't believe. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Even though I was sure there wasn't supposed to be any rain today, the forest felt different now, like it was watching me. After that day, Id said, stepping away from the tree, you started carrying silver bullets. Yep, I said, patting my gun. And iron ones, and the holy ones the elders gave us. Nicole looked back at us, her eyes wide. Speaking of things that were hidden, she crept forward, and I followed, Ed close behind. We were all staring at the ground now, at another set of those strange footprints. How long has it been? Ade asked, his voice barely a whisper. Nicole examined the tracks carefully. An hour ago, maybe less. And look. She pointed to the next print. It's changing. The second print was smaller, but still not human. The third was different again. It's nearby, Ade said, straightening up. And it's not bothering to hide anymore. A branch snapped nearby, followed by a noise like a hungry wind. We all reached for our weapons. The elders, I said, trying to sound calm. You need to take me to them. Immediately. That's what I'm afraid of, Id said. This isn't just a game anymore. This is a lure. We backed away slowly, our eyes glued to the forest. I thought about how far I'd come since my first day. I'd been so skeptical about all this, and now I was at the forefront of the battle against it. The forest knew that too, and that was the scariest part of all. We didn't sleep that night. Instead, we drove back to town and called in reinforcements. Ed and I were on the phone all night, rounding up every officer and specialist we could find who had any experience with this kind of thing. The next morning, the meeting area outside the station was packed. Everyone was buzzing, clutching coffee cups and staring at maps. Ed caught my eye and motioned me over. "Hey man," he said, his voice low. "There's something over here you need to see." I pushed through the crowd and saw the map covered in new red pins. It wasn't a spiral anymore. It was something else. "Nicole's over there," Ed said, nodding towards the parking lot. I saw her climbing out of her truck. She looked the same except for a new scar on her cheek. "Worse in her district?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Much worse," Ed said grimly. "2 rangers died last week." Nicole walked up to us, her eyes scanning the crowd. "Matt," she said, her voice tight. "Wish it was under better circumstances." "Yeah, well," I started. "It's that track we found last month," she said, cutting me off. "That was just the beginning. We're seeing new patterns, but they're changing so fast we can't even keep up." She pulled out a stack of photos and spread them on the map. They made the ones from last month look like child's play. "Fusion," Nicole said, pointing to one of the most disturbing images. "Multiple creatures fused together in ways that shouldn't be possible." I finished, my voice catching in my throat. The crowd around us was growing, the mood somber. "The elders say it's getting ready for something," Ed said. "Something besides territory marking or hunting." Nicole pulled out her own map and laid it over ours. "The attacks are forming something," she said. "A pattern in the pattern." "A ritual," I breathed. "Exactly," Ed said. "Which is why you and Nicole will be going out today. The elders gave me these." He pulled 2 small leather pouches from his jacket. "Protection charms. You're going to need them." Nicole took hers without hesitation. I slipped mine on too. "We have 4 hours before sundown," she said, glancing at her watch. "We need to reach the North Ridge before then." "I'll get the gear ready," I said, heading towards the equipment shed. "Matt," Ed called after me. "Remember what I taught you. Remember what you learned." I nodded, my stomach churning. Holy water, silver bullets, iron chains, the usual. 10 minutes later, Nicole and I were loading up the truck. "You've done this before," I said, watching her expertly cycle through the radio frequencies. "More than I care to count," she replied grimly. "I lost my partner 3 months ago. This thing we're chasing, it's getting smarter. Evolving." I turned the key in the ignition, and we set off down the Forest Service road. "You said the protocol for tracking it was different now," I said as we climbed higher into the mountains. "Yeah, can't be tracked the normal way anymore. You have to get inside its head. And how does a shape-shifting monster think?" Like a unnatural thing," she said. "It uses patterns you can't see, paths you can't walk unless you don't walk them." I finished, remembering Ede's lessons. She looked at me, a flicker of approval in her eyes. "That's right. They taught me to hear the spaces between the tracks." We rounded a bend, and the valley spread out before us. Somewhere down there, a monster was drawing its circle. "We'll head to where it last struck," Nicole said, downshifting as the road steepened. "Then we'll follow its trail in reverse until we find out where it was going." I looked at my gun, hoping the bullets inside would work on whatever this thing was. "And what do we do then?" "We hope the elders prepared us well enough." The road was getting rough now, and I had the feeling we were being watched. Whatever this thing was, it was expecting us, counting on us being there. It was probably laughing at us in its own sick way. It wasn't getting any easier to believe, but I knew I would have to soon. We were about to meet it face to face, and I had a feeling it would be very real. The truck crawled up the mountain road for another 20 minutes, the rain pouring down and fog swirling around us. Visibility was almost zero. Finally, we reached the end of the road at an old fire service lookout. "Ready?" Nicole asked, checking her rifle one last time. "As I'll ever be," I said, pulling the leather cord with the protection charm tighter around my neck. It was already soaked with sweat. We stepped out of the truck into the downpour. The air was thick with the smell of rotten decay. "The campsite should be half a mile east," Nicole said, consulting her GPS. The brush was dense, forcing us to walk single file. I watched Nicole's every move, how she stepped, how she scanned the surroundings, not just the ground but the trees, the shadows. "Wait," she said suddenly, crouching down. I stopped, following her gaze. "The branches," she whispered, "they're bent. Recent." "Yeah, see how wet the tree is," I said, catching on. "The campers came this way," she said, pointing to a scrap of neon orange cloth snagged on a bramble. "But they were being shepherded." Shepherded. Notice how the snapped branches form a path. It's too neat. Intentional, doll. She was right. Once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. There was a path of destruction leading into the woods. We followed it, the rain starting to ease up. I saw more signs of a struggle. Trees with deep gouges in their bark, places where something heavy had fallen, claw marks that started at shoulder height and went up from there. "This is the place," Nicole said, stopping at the edge of a small clearing. The campsite was a mess. A tent was shredded, camping gear scattered everywhere, some of it crushed, some untouched. "Hey," I said, kneeling beside a backpack. "Most of the stuff is scattered, but there's one thing that stands out. A hiking boot. Looks almost new." Nicole knelt beside me, her face grim. "Farmer's boots. Wahat. These aren't hiking boots. Look at the tread. They're farmer's work boots. But the campers were all college kids on spring break." Ide's words echoed in my mind. Once you start seeing the patterns, you can't unsee them. Maybe they borrowed them. I offered weakly. "No. City kids don't wear steel-toed work boots on a camping trip. And look at the size. It's huge." She took out a tape measure and started measuring the boot. Every time she did, it came out slightly different. "Matt," she said, her voice strained. "These prints, they're similar to last month's, but what? They're more advanced." A branch snapped behind us, and we both whirled around. "We should follow them," Nicole said, her eyes fixed on the forest. "But first, what do you see out there? What do you really see?" I ignored the obvious signs of a struggle and focused on the details. "It's too clean," I said. "Staged," Nicole said. "Like a theatrical campsite incident." More branches snapped, and I heard something that sounded like footsteps, but not quite. "Let's get out of here," I said, my voice trembling. "Yeah, just one thing." Nicole reached in her pocket and pulled out a small silver bell tied to a red string. She hung it from a nearby branch. "Just in case," she said, nodding towards the bell. We headed off in the direction of the tracks, which were getting harder to interpret. They started out human, then became longer, deeper, twisting into bizarre shapes that made my eyes hurt. The forest grew darker. Even though it was still morning, it felt like twilight. The rain had stopped, but water dripped from the branches, sounding like something sneaking up on us. Every time we turned around, there was nothing there. Nicole, I said, pointing to a tree up ahead. "Do you see that?" There was a carving on the tree, a strange symbol that looked like a spiral. But when I looked at it for too long, it seemed to spin. "Don't look at it," Nicole said, tugging my arm. "Some symbols are designed to keep you looking." The bell behind us rang one more time, then fell silent. I didn't know why, but I felt like it meant we had crossed a line. We had entered the hunting ground. The further we got from the spiral tree, the more time seemed to slow down. Every step felt like we were wading through molasses. The forest grew darker, the sounds of the forest fading away. I glanced back and saw the spiral tree disappear behind us. Nicole stopped and raised her hand. I froze, listening, but there was nothing. "Matt," she whispered. "Look down." I followed her gaze. The footprints were gone. What? No, it can't be. "Id's first rule," Nicole said, clutching her rifle. "If you don't see their footprints, don't follow them." There were a few leaves on the ground where the tracks should have been, but they were moving the wrong way, as if the wind was blowing them backwards. "We need to go back," I said, even though I knew what she'd say. "We can't. We're almost there." Her voice was shaking, which I didn't think I'd ever heard before. "And it's behind us now, between us and the truck." I knew she was right. I drew my gun, the silver bullets heavy in the chamber, and aimed it at the shadows. "How can you tell?" I asked. "The birds," she said. "They're flying the other way. Away from the thing behind us. And the moss." I looked where she was pointing. The moss on the trees was now pointing straight at us. A stick cracked nearby, and Nicole pulled out her compass, her hands trembling. "Matt," she said, her voice low. "Remember what Ed said about it learning?"
Yeah,
I think it learned how to hunt hunters." I was about to respond when I heard a strange noise, like a cross between laughter and howling, coming from the woods. "Go," Nicole said, her voice urgent. "Just go." We ran, not bothering to track anymore, just moving. The forest was changing around us, morphing. "The charm," I gasped, the leather burning against my skin. I feel it," Nicole said, her voice strained. "Either we're close, or it's close to us." There was another noise, footsteps, but something was wrong with them, as if whoever was walking wasn't used to it. It was coming from behind us, then beside us, then in front of us. "Nicole," I said, my voice tight. "The footprints." More footprints were appearing in the dirt ahead of us. They started as farmers' boots, then changed into something else entirely. "It's hurting us," she said, the color draining from her face. Like it did with the campers. The wind picked up, and I caught a whiff of that sickly sweet stench again. The sigil on my neck burned even hotter. "Choices?" I asked, trying to sound braver than I felt. Nicole was scanning the trees, looking for something, anything, to help us. "If we can just break its pattern, so we don't do either." Something dark and shadowy moved between the trees, something too tall and fluid to be human. "The amulet," I gasped. "We make our own pattern," Nicole said, rummaging through her backpack. She pulled out more of the silver bells and started arranging them in a circle around us. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Something the elders taught me, the last resort," she continued, placing the bells. "When the circle is complete, don't leave it." The trees seemed to grow darker. That weird laugh echoed again. "Nicole," I started to say. "Just a sec, one more." She placed the final bell, completing the circle. "Fear." Immediately, I felt a difference. The charm stopped burning and was instead pleasantly warm. The darkness was still there, but it didn't feel quite so oppressive. "What now?" I asked, watching the shadows dancing at the edge of our safe space. "Now," Nicole said, her voice steadier. "We wait, and we remember that this thing isn't just a hunter, it's a learner." The bells began to ring, one at a time, even though there was no wind. And in the darkness, something watched us, taking notes. Hours passed. We sat in the circle, listening to the chiming bells, the light fading around us. High noon turned to dusk in the blink of an eye, as if someone had dimmed the sun. Our protective circle seemed to be holding, but time was moving differently now. Your battery still good? Nicole asked, fiddling with her phone. I tried my flashlight. It died after a second. Not anymore. Yeah, me too. She gestured to her radio, which was only playing static. Nothing electronic is working. At least the protection charm is still working, I said. It was pretty much the only piece of equipment that was. The shadows outside the circle were growing larger, and the stench was getting worse. It's testing the boundary. Nicole says leaves started swirling around the perimeter of our haven. I heard a laugh from the woods, too slow and drawn out to be human. That's new, I said. It's learning, Nicole said, clutching her rifle. Getting better at pretending. The chuckle came again, a little closer this time. Then a voice, as if it was trying to learn how to speak. Of you cold here? I didn't answer, remembering Ide's warning. Nicole scooted closer to me. No matter what, she whispered. Do not answer it. Don't even think about it. Help us now, the voice pleaded, coming from all around us. Multiple voices overlapping. It's the campers, Nicole whispered. It's mimicking them. My flashlight flickered back on, and I saw a boot print in the dirt just beyond the bells, as if a farmer's boot was pressing down into the soil. Nicole, I see it. Another print appeared next to it, but this one was different, longer, with too many toes. Then another, human-like but backward. They surrounded us, changing shape with every step. It's showing us, Nicole said, her voice trembling. Showing us how it works. The voices went on, and after a while, I realized I could hear snippets of what they were saying. Let's make camp here. Who's there? We're being watched. The bells were ringing louder now, drowning out my thoughts. The heat from the charm intensified. Nicole grabbed at her own charm as it started to burn. How long can we stay like this? I asked, my voice tight. The tracks were multiplying, tracing circles around us. Until morning, she said, her voice strained. Or until the leftmost bell stopped ringing. No, Nicole whispered, her face white. No, no, no. Another bell went silent, and then another. Matt, Nicole said, panic creeping into her voice. Remember when Ed was talking about patterns? Yeah, we need to make one. Right now. She pulled out a small pouch of salt and dust, another gift from the elders, and started drawing symbols on the ground around us. The whispers grew louder, the tracks multiplied, becoming even more impossible. I heard footsteps coming closer from every direction. Hurry up, I urged, as the bells continued to fall silent. Whatever you're doing, hurry up. Just about done. Nicole drew another symbol, her hand shaking. The ringing subsided, and then darkness enveloped us. The voices became one, laughing, screaming, wanting, and then something was there, outside Nicole's smaller circle of protection. We weren't meant to see it. My eyes hurt just trying to look at it as it took on too many shapes at once. Don't stare at it, Nicole said, her voice trembling. That's how it gets inside you. Our protection charms were burning now. I didn't know how much longer they would last. I didn't know how much longer we would last. It was a long time until sunrise, a long time until we found out if Nicole's patterns were strong enough to hold. But I had a feeling we wouldn't have to wait that long. The symbols, I said, my voice hoarse. They're the only thing keeping it from attacking us. I know, Nicole said, her voice strained, but it's testing the perimeter, looking for a way in, and it's moving fast. Matt, she said suddenly, her voice different. The symbols, they're disappearing. I looked down. She was right. The salt and bone dust was fading, sinking into the dirt. Can you draw them again? I asked, already knowing the answer. No time. It's 2. She trailed off, staring at something outside the circle. The trees were different now, larger, more gangly, twisted together like the rib cage of some enormous beast. "What is that?" Nicole whispered, shining her light between the twisted trees. "Don't stare too much," I said, remembering Ed's warning. "It wants us to see it." A laugh echoed through the forest, closer now, more convincing. "We have to get out of here," Nicole said, her voice shaking. "The symbols won't last. But if we exit the circle, we're dead. If we don't." I saw it for just a moment, saw what it really looked like. The image was more terrifying than anything I'd ever seen, and yet there was something familiar about it. "Nicole," I yelled, seeing her step back towards the edge of the cliff. "Nicole, please." "Ed," said Nato. The sound of her rifle echoed through the darkness. For a brief second, I saw a flash of light illuminating the shadows. "There are so many of them," she cried, firing another round. "Can't you see them? The faces, the—" "Nicole, please. This is going to attract it." But she didn't hear me anymore. The thing that was testing us had figured out what it was looking for: a way in, a way to make us afraid. "The footprints," she yelled, shooting at nothing, at everything. "They're wrong. They're backward. They're—" I reached out to grab her arm, but she pulled away from me. The charm around her neck was glowing bright red. "Nicole, stay with me." "Can't, Stave, can't," she sobbed, laughing like the thing in the dark, in the trees, in the ground. She took a step back, crossing the line of the symbol. The darkness flowed towards her. "Nicole." She was running now, fleeing into the forest, her flashlight beam getting smaller and smaller. "Help her," the thing in the dark said in her voice, but wrong, like she was speaking through 1,000 mouths. I stayed close to the circle, watching Nicole disappear into the woods. Her cries went on for a few seconds. The house lay silent, then turned into a sound that was somewhere between laughter and sobbing, getting more and more distant. Soon, the only thing I heard was the wind blowing through the treetops. Then I heard more noises from the forest: growls, moans, footsteps. In the distance, I saw a pair of glowing eyes, then another and another. The symbols disappeared from the ground, and I knew I was no longer safe. I heard the creature that was chasing us moving closer. It sounded almost like a person, but not quite. I heard Nicole in the distance, but she sounded different. The only thing I recognized was the pain in her voice. A couple of minutes passed, and I noticed how the sun was about to set. Nicole's cries for help were followed by a deafening silence. The world around me was so quiet that I could hear a faint ringing in my ears. My flashlight beam played over the scene where we had been just moments before, our scattered belongings, the broken circle, the bizarre footprints. I should have left that place. I should have made my way back to the truck. But something kept me pinned to the ground, right where our circle had been. The trees groaned overhead, and the odor of decay intensified, along with the scent of gunpowder. "Think," I muttered to myself. "Think like Ed taught you to think." I looked at my watch. It was 3:15 p.m. Shouldn't it have been brighter outside? It was getting darker and darker. Something moved behind me. I turned, aiming my rifle, but I didn't see anything. "Nicole," I called out, immediately regretting the sound. "Nicola," the forest echoed back in multiple voices, each slightly wrong, slightly altered. The talisman around my neck was getting warmer and warmer. I focused on that feeling, hoping it would keep me sane for a little longer. Snap, snap, snap. It was the same wrong rhythm as before. The thing that had been inside of Nicole was still here, and it knew more things now. My radio buzzed to life. It was mostly static, but I could also make out some voices. "Location verified and stand by. Ed." He must have figured out something was wrong when we didn't check in. "This is Matthews," I said into the radio. Nicole is gone. There's something out here. There's..." The static got louder, then I heard laughter. It sounded like Nicole, but it was too slow, too off. "Los Nicole." The darkness repeated my voice, mimicking me. Something enormous moved between the trees. I shone my flashlight there, but saw nothing. However, large footprints were forming on the ground, as if something was stepping on it. The voice in the radio said, "Remain in your seat delivering lights and Nena. Remain in your seat, Matt. If you can hear me, just stay where you are." The creature made a sound like laughter again, using all of its voices at once. It was a painful sound that made my teeth chatter and my vision blur. My headlamp was beginning to die, and I realized I would need to change the batteries soon. I heard the sound of a helicopter in the distance and felt the darkness growing thicker around me. "Running out of time," Nicole said right next to my ear. The trees were flexing and bending, crowding together, blocking out the sunlight. I heard the sound of engines approaching. "Matt." Ed's voice came back on the line. Shoot them." I reached into my bag and grabbed a flare. The thing was getting closer, shifting and changing with every passing second. I lit the flare, and the world was suddenly cast in an eerie red glow. I could see the thing more clearly now, and it was a horror show of disfigured faces and limbs. The house lay silent, eyes that reflected the light like the surface of a pond. At that moment, I heard the sound of helicopters above us. The spotlights hit the ground, illuminating the thing in all its glory, and it began to recede into the shadows. More vehicles arrived, and I heard the sound of men shouting orders. "You're too late, Matt." It shouted from the woods.
"It's real! Stay where you are!"
"We're coming." The flare in my hand was sputtering and dying. In the last moments of its light, I saw a boot print appear in the dirt, the same as the one before. It was Nicole's boot print, but it was going in the wrong direction. The spotlight of Ede's team cast light on the scene, but the darkness was still there, just beyond the perimeter of their lights. He came up to me, looking at the equipment in the dirt, the symbols, the tracks. "Nicole," he said, his voice heavy. I shook my head, unable to speak. "We'll find her," he said. But we both knew what we were really looking for now wasn't Nicole anymore. I could hear people talking on radios and the sounds of generators, but in the background, barely audible, there was something else as well, something that sounded almost like laughter. Ed looked at me, his eyes filled with concern. "What did you see?" he asked gently. "Everything," I muttered. "Nothing. I can't." "It's fine," he said, clutching my arm. "Reinforcements are on the way. Special units. The elders are almost here." But when the floodlights were turned on and the helicopters showed up, I felt like we had become the center of attention. The house lay silent. The strange thing that took Nicole wasn't interested in hiding. It was interested in showing itself. We waited for hours for the elders to arrive, the night feeling longer than it ever had. At first, it seemed like an emergency, but soon it became clear that it was more of an organized effort. The floodlights were moved around, new shadows appearing and disappearing. The helicopters left after a while, probably because their fuel was running low. The sound of the generators could be heard from the road, but they were far away now. And when the sun rose, the search continued. Several powerful floodlights were turned on, illuminating the area like the hand of God had come down to banish the darkness. It was blinding, but at the same time, it felt like a relief after the pitch blackness that had swallowed Nicole. Ed started barking orders, and people fanned out in different directions. A generator sputtered to life, and the sound of footsteps crunching through the undergrowth echoed all around us. Standard search pattern, Ed told the assembled teams. Nobody goes off on their own. Nobody breaks routine. Understood. Clear, came the replies, but they were strangely muted. Matt, Ade said, looking at me, his voice softer now. You ready to get up? I nodded, though my legs felt like lead. The protection spell had stopped burning, but I could still remember the pain. Stick close, he said, loading his rifle with custom ammo. The lights don't keep it at bay. They just slow it down. We moved as a group, our flashlights cutting through the gloom. The crooked trees appeared normal again, but something still felt off about them. Those tracks, one of the younger officers said, pointing to a set of prints. They're changing. Don't look at them, Ade advised. Keep going. We pushed deeper into the woods, setting up floodlights every few feet. It made me feel less safe, somehow, like the darkness was just hiding outside the circle of light. Id, I said finally, my throat dry. What she saw when she made a run for it, he stopped, examining a snapped twig. I know, he said quietly. It gives you a vision of what you fear most. It's different for everyone. I heard someone laughing in the distance, but when we shone our lights in that direction, there was no one there. We have contact northeast, a voice crackled through the radio. Multiple on the move. Roger replied. Try to follow if you can, but do not engage. The floodlights flickered for a moment, and I saw dark figures moving in the shadows, with faces that could have once belonged to Nicole. The elders are putting a perimeter around the circle, Ade told me, glancing at his watch. They have a plan, but we need to stop it from spreading until then. Stop it from spreading, I thought with a half-manic laugh. How do you stop something that can be everywhere at once? You don't, Ed replied, reading my mind. You distract it with something more interesting. A long shadow passed between the trees up ahead, moving against the light. Contact, someone yelled. 10 o'clock. We all turned our lights towards the sound, but only saw a tall, lanky shape disappearing behind a giant tree. There were footprints behind it, beginning with Nicole's size, then growing larger and larger. Hold, Ade said to a few officers who tried to advance. It's trying to separate us. The communicator crackled again. We've set up camp. The elders are getting ready. Copy? Ed said. ETA. At least 20 minutes. They say it's more powerful than expected. That same laugh echoed from all over the forest. The flood lamps flickered again, this time for much longer, and I could see eyes opening in the dark. Ede, I whispered, my voice tight. The lights. I know, he said, his voice strained. It's adapting. More quickly now. Nicole's information, it's leveraging it. The four of us moved into a diamond formation and began to advance slowly. I kicked something and looked down to see Nicole's flashlight, still on. We've got movement, another officer stated. Multiple signatures moving counterclockwise. My protection charm was beginning to heat up again. 10 minutes to the ritual. The radio crackled. Stay put. It's not going to wait that long, Ed muttered. The flood lamps flickered again and shut off. I could see the thing in the darkness, a shape that was all shapes, a face that was all faces, and in the middle of it all, a face I knew. Don't look, Ede said, but I did. The thing that used to be our friend stepped out of the darkness, teaching the dark how to masquerade as a human. We took another step back, closing ranks. 5 minutes, the radio said. Hold, Ade said. It wants to show us what it learned over the past day. The power came back on after about 5 minutes. The generators kicked in, and the flood lamps began to light up again, one by one. The floodlights flickered one last time, then came back on, illuminating the clearing. But the thing that looked like Nicole was gone, as if it had never been there. Except for its tracks in the snow. Sector 7 got some motion. A voice crackled through the radio. Big clearing up ahead. This is where she disappeared, I said, but it felt like I was talking to myself more than to them. Ed nodded. Alpha and Bravo team, hold the perimeter. Charlie team, you're with us. We advanced into the woods, keeping a tight formation. I felt the protection charm warm against my chest, reassuring me as we pushed deeper into the forest. Within minutes, we reached a clearing. As soon as we stepped into it, our flashlights revealed, Jesus Christ, someone whispered. Maybe don't look, Ed said, holding me up by the shoulder. But I did. What happened in that clearing shouldn't have been possible. We found the remains of Nicole, or at least, we found what was left of her. Lock this place down, Ed said, his voice tense. I want readings on everything. Don't touch anything until the elders get here. The police set up more lights and equipment. I couldn't help but notice how they avoided looking at the middle of the clearing. The tracks, I said, doing my best to concentrate on specifics. They're not the same. Aded squatted down next to one of the prints, his headlamp shining on it. This is where it stopped pretending, he said. This is where it showed its true colors. I looked down at the footprints around Nicole's body. They started as human boots, then gradually morphed into something else, something that didn't quite resemble anything I'd ever seen before. She put up a fight, Ade said, gesturing to the shell casings on the floor. She used all her bullets. No was she did she. No. I don't think she was, Ade said, his voice firm. Whatever it was that we saw in the woods, or whatever it was that we heard, I don't think that was Nicole. I think she was already. He didn't need to finish his sentence. I already knew. Elders have reached the perimeter. Beginning final preparations. A voice crackled through the radio. We need a door. Ed muttered. Pattern indicates. I heard the breaking of branches again, in that same strange rhythm. The floodlights dimmed slightly but didn't turn off. Contact. One of the officers yelled. Incoming from the north. Multiple signatures. It's coming back to show us what it's done, I said, my voice hollow. My protection charm began to burn even hotter, and I saw movement in the darkness just outside the reach of our lights. Their faces were human, but only barely. Wait, Ede said. Wait for it. I had the strange impression that her body was shifting and changing in the dim light, as if it couldn't settle on one appearance, and that smell was everywhere now. Id, I said softly. The tracks are moving. We could see the footprints changing, shifting, showing us the steps of the story the thing in the dark was creating, showing us how Nicole died. Don't stare at it, Ede said. It wants you to know. To know is to let it in. I heard a laugh in the forest. It sounded like Nicole, but strange, like too many people were laughing at the same time. The floodlights flickered, and I saw dozens of eyes open up around the clearing. The ritual is starting, the radio crackled. Please stay on the line. Everyone back now, Ed yelled. We retreated from the creature, keeping our distance from the darkness. A moment later, Nicole emerged from the blackness. Remember, it said in 1,000 voices, what it means to be a human being. The charm shimmered as the elders' voices reached us. Whatever happened next, we had our answer, even if it was a terrible one, and the darkness was ready to show us everything it had learned about pretending to be human. I blinked, and the next moment, I was back in the hospital. We all survived, but not without scars. After months of recovery and questioning, I finally found my way to the elders. Or maybe they found me. They explained everything to me and offered me a place among them. I accepted. And now, a year later, I was part of a new circle. I had learned a lot since that night, but I still had nightmares about it sometimes. I would wake up in a cold sweat, convinced that I was still trapped in that forest.